Hi, welcome again to the 13th Annual Emerging Leaders Conference. And as we wrap up the video portion of the conference, I want to talk with you a little bit about developing a leadership action plan. And I have 5 pretty simple steps that I think will help your projects be really successful. So let's talk about those. First of all, I think it's important that you understand your goal and identify what that goal is. Because if you don't know what your goal is, it's going to be hard to be able to demonstrate that your project has been successful. So how do we decide on your goal? First of all, you want to decide what is the need that you're trying to address. Identify whatever that is. What is the thing that you want your project to address? It could be almost anything. It could be hunger. It could be access to books for elementary school students. It could be campus beautification. Let's use that one as an example. So let's say that you decide that you want to make your campus look better because maybe it's drab and boring looking, and that's what you identify as the need. Well, you need to maybe decide if other people feel the same way about your need. So you may think that that's important, but you need to ask maybe other students. Ask faculty or staff on your campus. Do you think we need to beautify the campus? Does it need to look better? Do we need to plant flowers? Understand the need. Also, what's the scope of your project going to be? So that's part of your goal too. Are you going to implement a project that just addresses your high school? Is your project going to involve other campuses on your school, the elementary school or the middle school? Are you going to have even a wider goal for your project so that it impacts your city, your community, or even if you're really ambitious, the state of Texas or the United States? You need to know really kind of what the scope of your project is as part of your goal. And then who else needs to be involved in order to make your project successful? So it may be that, again, if we talk about campus beautification, that you need to involve the administration. You may need to involve the people who are responsible for facilities management so that you know, if we plant flowers here, are there water sprinklers that will water them, or do we are going to have to drag a water hose around to water the plants so that they don't die? If you're talking about, for example, digging holes to plant trees, you may need to involve your city officials. Are there water lines or internet cables or something like that is buried, though we don't want to dig down and actually cut something that is actually going to cause more damage. So you need to decide who needs to be involved. What are maybe other nonprofits or organizations in your city or your community who might actually be helpful for you to implement your project? So all those things are important pieces of determining what your goal is. And then very importantly, who's going to benefit from your project? That also needs to be part of your goal. Are you just trying to benefit a certain segment of students on your campus, all students on your campus, just people who are in the athletics, just people who are in the arts, junior high students who are going to be coming up to the high school? Who's going to benefit from your project? And then step 2 is determining what are your action items. So once you know what your goal is, what are the steps or the tasks that you're going to accomplish in order to complete your project? You usually want to start with brainstorming. So brainstorm for ideas and consider questions like, what will be done? What are the tasks that we need to accomplish? And I'm actually going to provide you with a document that you can use if you'd like, that will track that for you, a little simple 1-page document. Assign those tasks to people. Who's going to do it so that who do I need to get a report from as to whether or not this particular task has been accomplished? And then really also importantly, when does it need to be completed? So you really want to have kind of a timeline set out for what are the tasks that we are going to accomplish, who's going to do them, and when do they need to be completed. Define roles for those people who are going to be part of the project. So and this will vary depending on the kind of project that you have. But almost all projects will need some sort of a chair, somebody who's going to just sort of keep track of what's going on, what's been accomplished, who's supposed to be doing it, what's left to be accomplished, and what are the expectations for that role and all the other roles. You may also have someone who's in charge of maybe recruiting volunteers. And so you need to know who that person is and what their job responsibilities are and what their timeline or deadline might be. You might also have someone who's responsible for community outreach. So if we stick with the example of the community or the school beautification project, you may have someone who goes out into the community and does outreach and asks for donations of tools for planting or donations of flowers or mulch. Your recruitment person will be recruiting volunteers for whoever's going to come for the planting day, maybe. So all of those roles need to be defined. And then you'll have checkpoints for progress. So oftentimes that involves maybe a weekly meeting if you have a very short time schedule for your project, or it may be a monthly meeting if your project's going to spread out over a longer period of time. But those things are important as well. So this gives you sort of a linear example of how the project would progress, right? So you'd start out by launching the project, you'd have your project tasks that you're going to accomplish, and then at the end you'll finish and you'll complete the project and measure your results. So let's talk about step 4. Step 4 is communication, which is really important. You want to, at the beginning, to communicate your plan with the faculty, with other students, maybe community members, and make sure that they understand what your goal is, the need that you've identified, who's going to benefit from your project, and communicate that the project's going on so that people know what your project is. And then during the process, you want to make sure that you communicate with each other, that you're working together as a team and you're communicating with each other to make sure that other people on your team know what your tasks that you're completing them by the deadline. And sometimes if you're not able to complete them by the deadline, you need to let your team know that as well, because it may be that they're able to jump in and help you complete your task. If you are feeling like it involves more than you thought it was going to. So communication, the good and the bad, is very important. And then step 5 is determining the success of your project. So how do you determine the success of your project? Well, you go all the way back to step 1 and you look at, again, what was our goal? What was the need that we identified? Who did we want to benefit? And then you measure your outcomes to determine whether or not you actually accomplished those objectives. So how do we measure outcomes? We look at whether or not the goal was tangible and measurable. And so we can do that in many different ways. So some quantitative ways that you can do that is to actually survey results from people. So ask them in an email survey or a paper survey that you hand out on campus, did our project accomplish campus beautification, or providing more books to elementary students, or whatever that might have been, whatever your goal was. You can also report results by reporting and collecting how many people were affected by your project, how many volunteers did you recruit, how many hours did those volunteers work, so you can report volunteer hours. How much money did we raise? How much money in donations were we able to collect? All of those things are really important metrics that we can use to say whether or not the project was really successful. And you can also collect sort of qualitative results too. So you can sort of interview people and say, what did you think about the project? Do you think our campus is prettier now than it was before? Do you think that it creates a better environment, that we have a kindness campaign? So those are all also types of measures that you can use to determine the success of your project. And then once you've collected that, you also want to communicate that. So you communicated with your project in the beginning. You want to communicate the results of your project in the end. And you can do that in a really simple one-page type of format where, again, you say, hey, this was our goal that we started with. Here's what we saw as the need. Here's who we thought would benefit. Here's what we did. And then this is the results of our project. So now you get to work together to create your own plan and your own project. And you'll record a 10-minute presentation about your plan. We absolutely want you to be creative. So be creative. We've seen some really great videos over the last few years. And then also be professional. So make sure that you use good lighting and a good background and you're speaking clearly. And you'll be invited back to campus in the spring, in April of 2023, to present the outcomes of your plan. And we really look forward to seeing it then.